Welcome back to Become a Calm Mama. I'm your host. I'm Darlene Childress, and I have for you another guest that works in the digital space, in the screen-free, media-free space, and her name is Molly DeFrank, and she wrote a book called Digital Detox, the 2-week tech reset for kids. Last summer, I did do an episode all about the work from Molly's book, Digital Detox, and I went over it and I gave you a play-by-play and walked you through exactly what she recommends in the book. And then today, I got a chance to interview her and give you an opportunity to hear her voice and hear her perspective. And she was just super lovely and really what a delight to meet her. And I'm really excited to share this interview with you. I highly recommend her book, Digital Detox. You can get it on Amazon or wherever because it really is a simple, accessible way for you to reset your kids' nervous system and give them a break from digital input and allow your family to become a little bit more whole and integrated. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Molly DeFrank.
Oh no, sorry, I'm messing this up. Hi. There
we go. Hi, Molly.
How are you? Do you pronounce it Darlin?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Nice to meet you, Darlin.
Nice to meet you. I'm so happy that you're on the podcast today.
Yay. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I loved your book and the first book, Digital Detox. And as a podcast host and a parent educator, I really do always want to help parents have access to like healthy tools and tools that are manageable and accessible. And in this tech space, it can be so overwhelming where you're like, you're doing it all wrong. And what, fix it, change it, stop it, solve it, that energy. Yep. And I just felt like your book really normalized the tech overuse and gave really practical, accessible tools so that parents can feel empowered to do the work. So I'm excited for this conversation. So thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate that. You saying that. I'm glad that you felt that way.
Good. Yeah. So please introduce yourself, whatever you want to share with us. And then I have questions to talk about the digital detox and get into that topic. Yeah.
Real quick. I'm in my garage. There's an AC unit. Can you hear it?
Nope.
Okay, cool. I'll leave it on then. Okay. You let me know if you have any like sound issues and I'll fix it. So anyway.
Yeah. No, we're good.
Okay. So sorry, just introduce myself, you said?
Yeah, please.
Okay, great. I'm Molly DeFrank. I'm the author of Digital Detox, the 2-week tech reset for kids. I have 6 kids, ages 8 to 15, and I live in California, and I love helping parents get a handle on the screen time struggles.
Yeah. Everyone right now, all they heard was 6 kids. Do you get that a lot where people are like, wait, what?
Yeah, I really do. And I like to encourage parents. Honestly, I think the hardest number of kids to have was 2, because going from 1 to 2, you have to let all the things that don't really matter, you just kind of have to let them go. You realize like, oh gosh, these kids have so many needs. And then once you start juggling or you're making 2 PB&Js, you're like, oh, what's a third? What's a fourth? What's a fifth? Just come on over. I'll just throw another plate out. You switch to paper plates. You take things in stride a little more. You can't stress out about the small stuff. But yeah, it is, I guess, a lot of kids.
That's so good. My neighbor, I tell this story on the podcast a lot because I loved it so much. And people would say, how do you do it? How do you do it with 4 kids? And she would say, not as well as you.
It's probably true.
It's just this beautiful answer of like, not stressing, not overthinking, just kind of like, I lowered my standards at some point and it's working okay.
So true. Yeah, I remember one time I had a kid at the park had an accident or spilled a popsicle or something on them, and I ran to the car and I had a change of clothes for her and I put it on her, and my friend looked at me. She had 2 kids and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you're so organized that you had a change of clothes." And I looked at her, I'm like, "That was just laying in the car because I didn't clean it. It's not like plan ahead. This is like I'm so messy that everything's come full circle." And it's actually proven to be beneficial sometimes. So yeah, you just kind of just go with the flow and do what you can.
Yeah, your mess served you. I love that. It's so good. It's true though. I mean, that can be a metaphor for life. It's like sometimes our response flexibility and the ability to pivot. I just did an episode on pivoting, parenting pivots. And it's like when you're a little bit more free and open, you actually have a little more flexibility and you're ready to problem solve and be creative, which does lead us into the detox space because you are, we're going to get into all the nitty gritty of it, but like when you are doing a big shift in your family, there is going to be things that come up that you're like, well, what's going on here? I don't know how to solve this. And being able to not so be so tight. Like we're in the big picture here. I think about when I teach bedtime routines or introducing new foods or, transitioning to preschool, that we can get really tight about the day. And instead of thinking of the bigger picture of like, yep, it's going to be fits and starts and stops and all sorts of movement towards something, and having that intention and having that goal in mind can be really freeing, because in the middle of it, it's going to be a little messy. And that's especially true of a digital detox, but really anything. I'm sure you can relate.
Oh yeah, that's so true. And I think as a culture, we're allergic to struggle. You know, we're growing up in a time when you see everything perfectly dialed in on Instagram or social media, and there are these aesthetics that we aspire to as moms. And we sometimes, if we don't take a minute and think about it, we think that that's like the status quo for people all the time, that there was no struggle involved in getting there. And that's just not true. Anything worth doing, anything great that happens, there's so much struggle behind the scenes along the way. And sometimes as parents too, we want to skip the struggle, but that's really where the seeds are planted. That's where everything good grows. You know, even working out, it's like you lift weights, the muscles breaking, and that's how it grows back stronger. It's the same is true for parenting. Everything good and worthwhile that happens is really happens through struggle.
Mm, yeah. Positive messages on become a calm mama. Here we go. I'm just kidding. Everything's going to be a struggle, which is true a little bit. Just normalizing it's not going to look like. I had a person I interviewed from Front Row Moms who works with working moms, and she said, so much in parenting doesn't look like I thought it was going to look.
Yeah.
And I have a image, and we're off the rails a little bit, but I had this image of myself, and my friend and I used to talk about it before we had kids, that we were going to be. I lived in West LA, like near the ocean, and we were going to be these moms that were like very perfectly coiffed with like our nails done. That was like a very specific thing. And looking super cute, pushing our little babies in the stroller along the Venice boardwalk. We had this big image, and now our kids are both 21, and it has just been so messy all along. She's divorced. My kids had major pivots with the pandemic, and it's just, we're all in the wash looking fine, but it never felt like I thought it was going to feel or look.
So true.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the weeds a bit
Okay.
on um, digital detox. So, right before your episode airs, I'm airing an episode with Moms Against Media Addiction. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with the organization with Julie
Yeah,
Scalfo? Yeah.
I've heard of them. They do great work.
Yeah, great work. So, this is such a great piggyback because we talked about, being really intentional about our kids' screen time use and looking at ways that we can be more mindful about what we allow our kids to use and when and those kinds of things. And a lot of parents maybe have gone too far in allowing their kids a lot of freedom around screens. And I think this is especially true post pandemic. So I'm going to speak on that just for a second, if you don't mind. Before, so I had kids, my kids were 13 and 14 when the pandemic happened. So I had already had a lot of years where we were tech free. Like we had done slow tech, we had introduced tech slowly. They got phones around 13, both of them, which maybe I would have done it differently, but they had phones, and they hadn't, excuse me, they hadn't played video games that much, or, they had slow tech. So then the pandemic happened, and it was like cat out of the bag. I don't know what happened in those rooms. Excuse me. It was rough. Like, and everyone was just Zoom school. I mean, that was insane. And I think that felt like if you had a 13-year-old, if you have a 13-year-old now, like you have a 15-year-old now, he was 10, right? Or she was 10. If you have an 8-year-old, 3, right? We can look back, and everything's about 5 years. We could look back at that time. And I think what happened to parents is that they felt out of control of what was okay and what not. Like the rules broke because of Zoom and because of quarantines and all of those things. And now we're seeing maybe a course correction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to normalize that we're all in this place where we did what we did. We made the best. We figured it out. We didn't. We had too loose of rules. And now maybe our kid is struggling. Yeah. What
Yeah.
are you
And that's,
seeing?
I'm seeing that that is the boat that every parent is in right now. The vast majority of parents say that their kids' screen time use is their biggest concern, their biggest struggle in parenting. I think like 75% of parents. The top three or four concerns for parents all revolve around screen use. It's around, what their kids are being exposed to online or too much video game use or video game addiction. This is a huge concern. 8 to 12-year-old kids are spending 40 hours per week on digital entertainment right now. 13 to 18-year-olds are spending 50 hours a week. Our kids are spending the same amount of time as having a full-time job, but just being digitally entertained. And really, parents are struggling with this because they're hearing from all this research that's come out how damaging it is to our kids. But they can feel powerless at the same time because they look at their kids and they're like, I don't know how to fix this thing because I know when the screen timer goes off that my kid turns into a monster. So are you telling me that the best thing to do is to live with a monster around the
Mm.
clock? Like, I don't want my kid to fall apart or throw these tantrums all the time. If they don't have their screen time, that's what I'm dealing with in the home. So my heart goes out to these parents, and that's why I wrote this book, and that's why I love talking about this issue, because there's so much hope and freedom on the other side. There's so much that parents can do to just get back in the driver's seat with technology. And I would just encourage you, if you're listening, um, doing this digital detox for your kids, you're not signing up for 2 weeks or the rest of your life of a kid falling apart, throwing screen tantrums. That's not what it is. You're actually getting your kids back. You're going to see that this technology has been doing things to their brains that you didn't even know. For me, I detoxed my kids. I had my oldest was 10 at the time. It was before COVID when I did this. And I thought that's what I was doing. I was signing up for like tantrums and crazy behavior, and my kids staring at me like I needed to entertain them, like a cruise ship director doing all this like crazy stuff for them. And that's just not what happened. And I think the fear that's holding parents back from actually taking action is really unfounded. And when parents actually do just go for it and they pull the plug and they do the detox, every time parents are surprised. They're like, this transformed my family in the best way. So that's why I love talking about, is just sharing with parents. You can do this thing. It's simpler than you think. There might be like a day or two of hardship, but I have really practical ways to get in front of that. And really what you're getting back for you and for your kids, for your relationship, for their future, their creativity, their mental health, their social life, their academics. It pays itself back in dividends, really. So I love helping parents with this.
I agree. I agree. And you're so on point by saying, the idea that you're going to have that screen time chaos all the time from now on, because like you said, you go, okay, time's up, timer's gone off. And then you have that giant, no, 5 more minutes. It was downloading. You said, no, I didn't start right at 11. My sister came in and interrupted me and you asked me if I had to go to the bathroom. I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of negotiating and big feeling cycle that comes, and it's purely dysregulation from
Yeah.
the experience with the device, and the transition from that stimulation to non-stimulation, that boredom gap, that dysregulation that happens, then on the other side you get a little bit of freedom. But if you're experiencing that daily and you're picturing a detox, and I want to talk about what a detox is, but you're picturing a detox, you're thinking, I'm going to have that for the rest of my life or for the whole 2 weeks. And what
Yes.
you're offering, in my experience, I've done a detox as well, around the age of 10 or 11, the same. And it was not as bad. It actually was way better. The first few days were really tough, and we did 3 weeks, and it was in the summer we did it, and it was so great. I did get my kid back, and we did have a wonderful summer, and there was a lot less. He was happier, so he was better behaved, and it was
Yeah.
beautiful. So break down a digital detox, just kind of the concept, and then I want to talk about kind of like how to know if you need one.
Yeah. So it's basically, I recommend 2 weeks, no digital entertainment for your kids. So that means no TV, no video games, no social media. Get those phones out of here.
No
Just
iPads.
no iPads. Yeah, tablets are huge. None of that. All of it's gone. YouTube, everything. So what you're doing is you're actually just giving your kids a chance to reawaken interest in real life activities and other people. You're helping to awaken their creativity, their boredom negotiation skills. These are things that our kids need to succeed in life, and they've actually been deprived of these opportunities when they've been on these screens. So that's what you're doing. And in fact, um, I came across some really interesting info that Silicon Valley, these guys who work at these tech companies, they'll routinely give themselves digital detoxes over the weekends or over long holidays because they know what it does to the brain, what the social media, what the gaming does to the brain. And it's just jacking up the dopamine levels in our brains. So that's
Yeah.
really what you're doing is you're resetting the dopamine levels in your kids' brains. And let me just take a minute to explain why that's so critical here. Um, our brains are wired to release dopamine whenever we experience anything pleasurable or enjoyable. You go for a run or you have a delicious bite of food, dopamine is released. And these brilliant people in Silicon Valley have taken what they know about how to release dopamine in the brain and they've baked dopamine release points into the games, into the apps. So now you've got, hundreds of people on the other side of your kid's tablet, of your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old's tablet, and their sole job is to hijack the dopamine system and keep your kid on the device. Your kid doesn't stand a chance against that. There's so much dopamine getting released as a result of their device use that real life dopamine just doesn't even register. In fact, dopamine receptors are dying. They're numbing out. So now you've got this addictive cycle where it takes more dopamine to experience the same amount of pleasure that they used to get from less dopamine. So that's why when you tell your kid, turn off the device, go play outside, and they say, no, that's boring, they're not trying to be a stinker. There's a physiological change in their brain where they don't even register the fun outside or in real life because they're getting so much more dopamine from the device. So when you take it all away for 2 weeks, what you're really doing is you're giving them a fresh start. So now they can go outside and play, they can blow bubbles, they can run around with their friends or knock on the neighbor's door, jump in the pool, and that actually starts to feel enjoyable for them. And there's a chemical reason for that.
Yeah, it's like a giant nervous system reset.
Yeah.
And moms can probably relate because we talk about, I mean, this whole podcast is called Become a Calm Mama. I mean, anyone listening who's a regular listener knows we've talked about this so many times, but just to remind everyone that our nervous system gets dysregulated and we have the stressor in our life, the circumstance, the situation, like you talked about a little kid, having an accident at the park. And all of a sudden you go into mom gear and you're on, right? You're get solving the problem and you're dealing with it, and that stress juice is very important to problem solve. And then you have the stress juice, the stressor's over, but you haven't really released all that stress juice. And whether that's cortisol or in the gaming world it can be dopamine, but it can also be cortisol too, like
Yeah.
especially for adults, incredibly intentionally creating stress on your device in order to
Yeah.
keep you kind of going back and problem solving through the device. And when you're a parent, we have to take time that's outside of the experience to reset our nervous system. Going for a walk or, drinking some water, or going to the bathroom. We have the problem with our kids or whatever's happening, and then we go back in and we reset our nervous system. And if we don't do that, we stay at that high level. And that's if we think about the device in terms of the nervous system and how it's creating all of that dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline, all of that going on in the nervous system, when does your kid get to actually reset?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're spot on. And I'm glad you brought up the cortisol and the adrenaline because when these kids are gaming too, their brains are just being bathed in these stress hormones. And then when our kids lose it or they're throwing a tantrum or they're mad about something, we're using the problem, pretending like it's the solution, and we'll hand over the tablet to get them to soothe, but it's just they're numbing out.
Yeah.
They're not learning those techniques like you were talking about, going for a walk or taking some deep breaths or having a conversation with someone. They're just not learning these skills of self-regulation. And so the childhood is such an important time to learn those things. The brain goes through these pruning periods, and when kids are like 4 and 5, and then again when they're in their early teens, where whatever they're repeating and practicing those things get hardwired. And whatever they're not using, it'll get pruned. So if our kids are using back and forth conversation to negotiate these like social relationships and those social emotional skills, they're going to get great at that. If they're reading books, they're going to get great at. If they're doing first person shooter games, they'll get great at that. So we just need to decide, like, what do we want these foundations for our kids to be? Do we want them to be learning these coping skills, learning how to negotiate boredom in a waiting room, at a restaurant? Do we want them to numb out? Give yourself the peace and the freedom, parents, to, if you're at a restaurant and you're trying to teach your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old to sit still and wait for their food. I know that's so stressful, but good for you for not bringing out the tablet, for not turning on a device, because it takes several times. It takes a long time of doing this and teaching them how to sit and how to wait patiently. So those are skills they need. And having them numb out, that's not helping them. That's actually degrading the sorts of skills that we're trying to cultivate in our kids.
Yeah, we want to raise emotionally healthy kids.
Yeah.
And the short term ease, sometimes you got to do it. Like mamas, we get it, right? You got to do what you got to do. But let's choose also the long term strength, right? And being, like I said, big picture, kind of what are my values? Where are my intentions? What do I want for my kids? And sometimes that means doing the hard thing. But what I love about the detox is it actually sets you up for making it a lot easier. So if you've gone to a place like for my family, why we did a detox was in the summer, I had introduced video games to my 10, 11-year-old. I waited for as long as I could because he had an older brother. So I was like, I felt like at 12, the older one could handle it. But then with little kids, whatever you do with the first, it's harder to keep it back for the second. And it's funny because my older one just turned 21. And so he can like drink a beer if he wants. But then my other one's 19. And I think we're all like, okay, this one we're not going to, just because you're 19, just because your brother's doing it, you're going to do it. Anyway, it's the same kind of boundary. Like, we introduce something and then you go, oh, wait, maybe this wasn't the right time. And that's sort of what happened for us. And my son just seemed lots of raging at the game, yelling profanity and really young. And I just felt so out of bounds. And I was reading a lot of Victoria Dunkley, which a lot of your work is based on her work, and how to reset your child's brain. And it was like, do this detox. And I'm like, okay. And we did it. I did it with a group of two other moms and me. So all of our kids hung out all summer and we all did it at the same time. And that made it so much easier because then they had playmates to play with and they had almost like complaining partners.
Yeah.
And they all became, Dr. Dunkley became this name that everyone used like almost as a swear word. Like the kids, they'd be like, Dr. Dunkley. It's just so funny to me. So we did that. And what happened afterwards is that the rest of the summer, I could reintroduce my rules in a way that felt aligned with what was going to work for us. And we had to we had given too much freedom. It had gotten kind of out of bounds. So then we decreased it completely so that there was kind of a no rule, no screens for the whole family. And then from there, when I went to go introduce it again, it could be a little more aligned and a little bit more acceptable to them, that like, okay, we know we're not going to always have it. We're not going to go out of bounds with this device. It's going to be limited. And if I needed to take a weekend off, they would be able to, because they knew it wasn't forever. We could just take a detox. Sometimes we would do like the whole screen free in the summer, like a screen free week or a screen free weekend, and just to kind of keep those resets. So that's why I did it and when I did it. But what do you recommend? Like, how does someone know they should, or what are some signs?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Dr. Dunkley. When I came across her work, I was blown away because I had already detoxed my kids. And then I started sharing tips for this online. Here's how to do this. And then I started reading the research and the science behind what this technology is actually doing to our kids' brains. And Dr. Dunkley actually coined, and you are aware of this because you read her book, but she coined this new condition called electronic screen syndrome, which, and this is what really blew me away. She said this is a condition that is brought on by too much digital entertainment, and it will disguise itself as ADHD and bipolar disorder and OCD and all of these things that parents think their kids might have, when it's really just the adrenaline and the cortisol and the dopamine, just it's hijacking their brains. So like a lot of parents, I thought my kids' screen use was just really impacting them right after the screen timer went off, right after we put it down. But until I read Dr. Dunkley's research, I didn't appreciate that the reason why it was affecting them around the clock. It was affecting their sleep. It was affecting all of these things. And the crazy thing is that in Dr. Dunkley, in her book, she said that kids will go into her practice and they'll go for, bipolar disorder, ADHD, whatever. She won't diagnose a new client until they have undergone a digital detox, because most of the time the symptoms will resolve and those kids won't even need medication, because that is how powerful this technology is. So anyway, I just
So
wanted
amazing.
isn't
So
that wild? I know, I couldn't believe it.
Electronic screen syndrome, just
Yeah.
to like slow it down for the listener. Yeah, it's weird. And what we're referring to is Reset Your Child's Brain, a book by Dunkley, and we will put that in the show notes. And when you think about like electronic screen syndrome, what are some of the signs of that? But like ADHD, and we have diagnoses we can throw around, but what are the actual symptoms of it? Do you remember?
Yes.
Um,
Irritability, aggression, low frustration tolerance, problems sleeping, inattentiveness. Kids are just a little ornery. So just that
mhm,
irritability, all those things, kids that don't seem to be able to focus on something for very long,
mhm.
things that kind of look like ADHD.
Yeah.
It's all of these things that can either disguise itself as those conditions or exacerbate them when they really are there. So yeah, and her book is great. Mine is more of like a parent in the trenches sort of a
Yes.
perspective and kind of some practical tips. Here's what to do when everything goes south. But yeah, she has great research.
Well,
But
and I recommend your book a lot because of that, because it's so accessible and it's, you know, not so research heavy. Like I'm like, of course, a parent educator and a podcast host. Like I'm in the weeds all the time on all of this stuff. But for just kind of your lame parent who's just, wanting to figure out what the heck should I do? I love your book. It's short and accessible and easy to read and kind of like gives you just enough information. So
yeah, it's
spot
good.
on. Yeah, it's good.
I also really appreciated that you grabbed a couple of friends to do your detox. I think
Hmm.
that is totally clutch because, there's strength in numbers. And just
Yeah.
like you said, the kids have people to kind of commiserate with. That's great. Good for them. Enjoy that.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Go complain about us.
yeah, that's fine. Go for it. But then the parents, you can troubleshoot with each other and you can encourage one another. And I think that's so important. But yeah, I have the book broken down. The first half is how to do the detox. I say that every successful detox that I've walked parents through has four things in common. You're going to unplug. You can remember it like this acronym undo. You're going to undo the tech trance for your kids. So the U stands for unplug, cold turkey, 2 weeks. If you want to go longer, you can. We did ours for a couple of months. I didn't tell my kids at the time it's going to be 2 weeks. Obviously, if you tell them it's 2 weeks, it's got to be 2 weeks. But my kids were young enough to where we could say, until further notice, we're not doing digital entertainment. And I recommend that cold turkey because, and if you're listening, you're probably, if you've been trying to add 30 minutes, take 30 minutes away, it doesn't work. We already know that doesn't work. So you got to do cold turkey. And it really just goes back to the dopamine that we talked about. You're resetting the dopamine levels in your kid's brain. So unplug cold turkey 2 weeks. And then the N stands for notice your kids like never before. You're going to observe your kids. Where are those weak spots? If they cannot wait their turn, they have the patience of I don't know, a potato. What has like no patience quotient?
Well,
And
they say a lot of times they use a goldfish, like
oh yeah,
like because the goldfish is
attention
like
span.
moving around all the
It's
time. Yeah.
true. Yeah. So if they have no patience, they can't wait their turn. Great. That's something you want to hone in on. You want to help put them in situations where they have to grow there. And again, like we were saying earlier, people we want to avoid the struggle and kind of numb it out, but we're going to go against that urge and we're going to kind of put our kids in these experiences to really to grow where they need to grow. And also we're going to notice what are our kids interested in that has nothing to do with the device. Before our detox, my three oldest kids, their favorite hobbies, it was each a different video game. And I thought, well, that's fine. That's how kids play these days, but it doesn't have to be. And after our detox, I noticed, wow, this kid loves cooking. I didn't really appreciate that because if he had the option to go game in the other room, he would take it. But during the detox, I'd be in the kitchen chatting with my kids, cooking something, and they all hang out for a little bit. And then there's one that stayed behind, and the rest kind of wander off over the next, 10 minutes. But one stays behind asking questions about the food. And I'm like, maybe you want to cook. So, we'd get some kids' cookbooks and help bring him in and he'd help. Or new card games or whatever. And you're gonna start to notice what is your kid into and pick up nonfiction kid books at the library. Soccer. One of my sons was really into soccer. And so I got him a couple books about great techniques and he actually started using some of them. It was so cute.
Yeah.
And then D, develop a list of screen-free fun ideas. I have a ton of these in the book, but really just sit down and help your kids, show them they have everything they need in their brain and their imagination to think of what they can possibly do for fun. We have honestly the time we're living in, kids have never had more options and opportunities of what they can do to fill their free time. So don't believe your kids when they say there's nothing to do. There are so many things to do. And sitting down and helping them come up with this list is showing them, look, you guys know how to think of things to do. You can figure this out. And then O is open the books. You can make a bookworm out of any kid. I used to think that some kids like to read for fun and some kids don't. That's not true. You can actually make any kid love reading. I've had some of my kids take to reading immediately. Some of them, it's a labor of love to be a book matchmaker. But I have lots of tips for that in the book too. And then the second half of the book is, well, now what? How do we make a plan, a long-term plan? We don't want to like turn into Little House on the Prairie here. Like we're not moving off the grid. We like Mario Kart in our house. We like some technology. We enjoy watching shows and movies together as a family, but what is the right place for this technology in our home? So I help parents. It's going to look different in every home, and that's great. It should. No one knows your kids like you do. So I just help parents take what they learned in their detox and then make a plan that fits their family.
Yeah. And that is what I love about the detox period of time, like I said, is that it gives you a chance to reset, to figure out what the interests are and, kind of how your family interacts. How do you play? How do you not play? What does work look like and chores and bringing in all of those responsibilities and without the distraction of the device. And then when you get to be intentional about how you want to bring devices back in and go through that thoughtful kind of intentional way of having screens in your family. And I really do want to go back real quick to how really the last 4 or 5 years have been very hard for parents in this space, partly because the schools give them Chromebooks and iPads and individual devices, and the social norms have been a little bit like give your kid a personal device at fifth grade, graduation. That's kind of normalized. And then also just maybe you don't give your kid an iPad or a tablet, but you have one and they become kind of reliant on it. And it the stress of the society and all the things that have been happening in the world make it really hard for us to stay present. But the truth is, when you take the devices out, you create space for new ways of relating. And I'm really glad that we had a slow tech family the whole time because my kids played toys. They knew how to entertain themselves. And I talk a lot on the podcast about like that boredom gap and that dysregulation. And you said, the kid comes out after they use their device and they're like, it's boring outside. And you said, to them, that is very true. And really having compassion for our kids when they're in that dysregulation, not solving it, not immediately. If you go right to like your list, I love having the list. But I've noticed that if you go right to the list while they're in the middle of that dysregulation, they'll reject every idea. But if you wait a bit and you let them struggle and just say, like, you can handle it. This is hard. I get it. You're going to figure this out and hold space for that belief in their ability to self regulate without making it a crisis in yourself or that something you have to solve or something's wrong with them. Then going, yeah, I'm here when you're ready and being available. you can be still doing your thing, kitchen cleanup or whatever you're doing, or sitting down reading a book yourself or looking out the sun. I don't know, whatever you're doing, playing with another child. The kids will come to you. Fine. What? Did you say Play-Doh? Fine. They kind of show up in that grumpy energy, but they're ready to pivot
Hmm.
into something new. And I
Yeah.
wonder if you've noticed that behavior and like the parent struggle there.
Oh, for sure. And I think, it goes back to one of the things you were saying that we can feel dysregulated as parents. And when you've got a kid whining at you because they're bored, you're like, gosh, I don't want to hear the whining. I want to
Mhm.
just take care of this. Let's like end it. One of my favorite tricks for the boredom solution, I'm sure I got this from my mom when I was a kid, but we would say, yeah, you could think of something to do, or if you can't think of anything, I have this basket of laundry that you can fold. I have plenty of chores that you need to help around the house. If I hear the word bored, I hear, oh, I need a chore. And the kids usually find something to do real quick. They're like, oh, I have way better ideas than that. So they'll come
Yeah.
up with something. But I think that's great. And, learning how to negotiate boredom is so important. And that's one of the things I noticed too after, so the first day of our detox, I really braced myself. The hardest part too is breaking the news to your kids. They're going to lose it. They're going to hate it, obviously. So you're the calm parent in the room. Even if on the inside, you're like, this is horrible. What have I done? But that's how I felt, at least. And we stayed calm. You're not in trouble for anything. It's okay. We're just going to try it. We're going to try it for a little while. And I braced for a very stressful day. But the next day, my kids knew that if they complained of boredom, they would be met with a chore. And so they played their hearts out. They made forts. They were young enough to still be into that. And where they usually would hit a boredom wall, or we can't keep this side propped up, and they'd kind of get frustrated or bored, and usually they'd be like, can we watch a show? Well, that wasn't an option. So instead of turning to the easier thing, they would figure out a way to fix it. And they would, like, take a breath and push through. And those things, even when our kids are so small, even if you're talking about a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year old, you're developing stamina and grit in your kids, and you're developing problem solving skills. And it's all these little tiny micro experiences of pushing through frustration, pushing through difficulty, even in the things that look tiny. The tower falls over, you go again. You don't just like go towards the easy thing. You don't give up. And I've watched my kids grow in so many areas just as a result of being exposed to falling down and having to fix something. And I think that's one of the hidden benefits that we don't really talk about enough. Another thing I wanted to mention was,
Wait, I
oh,
want
go
to
ahead.
say something
Yeah.
about that if you don't mind,
Yeah.
because I think I've thought about this a lot, and I appreciate Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, a lot, of course. Everyone does. And I think the anxiety is actually from the lack of belief in themselves that they can overcome obstacles. And that if I don't believe I'm capable, if I haven't experienced enough frustration that I've overcome, enough obstacles that then I have reset myself, then I'm not going to believe that I can handle it. That's going to create a crisis of confidence. That's going to create anxiety. I think that the screens have become like a blankie or like a soothing thing
Um,
in that though they create stress, they create anxiety.
mhm.
Yes, they create dopamine, they create all the stuff that we're talking about. But it's really the opportunity cost that is more true, that when you take that ability to soothe or get your needs met through tech, and that's off the table, you are forced to find other ways to get your needs met. In it, addiction world, we use abstinence, right? In order to create space to move to another coping strategy. Abstinence in itself is not all that valuable
Mhm.
if it's easy. Abstinence is only valuable when you are kind of butting up against the limit or the boundary of no. And then you have to figure out a different tool. Like I'll say abstinence around yelling at your kids. Like we'll create a detox, right? Like a yelling detox, and don't do that. And then see what happens, what else you have to do to communicate, or what else you have to do to cope, or what else you have to do to soothe. And that really is so valuable for our kids.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's a great Jonathan Haidt quote. He says, experience, not information, is the key to emotional development. And he calls the phones and the tablets experience blockers because they reduce the face-to-face play in the real world. And that's how kids learn empathy and language and grit and truly all of these things that if you ask parents, and I start the book with this too, like let's just zoom out for a second and take a minute. Our schedules are packed, life is busy, the days fly by, we're just trying to keep our heads above water, but zoom out for a second and talk with your spouse and what are the things that I want to instill in my kids when my kid leaves my house, moves out of this house. What are they going to look back and say? My parents really wanted to make sure that I blank, that I was, that I grew up to be brave, strong, looked out for others, loved the people around them, wasn't selfish, use my gifts for the good of other people. Like, what are these things, these big kind of lofty ideas that we're trying to instill in our kids? And then I think most parents would probably have similar ideas they want to impart. But then you zoom back in and look at the day to day, and you have to go, gosh, does our daily life support these big goals? Or are we handing our kids these devices that really erode our efforts to build these things in our kids? So I think it's so important to kind of take a step back. And I'm so glad you brought that up because that's what happens. These devices are experience blockers.
Yeah. And it's, some parents listening are already doing a very good job at managing their device use, especially like longtime calm mamas. They have limits, they understand compassion. And I don't want anyone to go, oh God, now I better do this. I don't want to create more anxiety. Really looking at, does your child seem like they're not coping with stress very well? Do they seem that they are, like you said, highly irritable? Do they seem that they're having, you're even a ton of sibling conflict, like
Yeah.
tons and tons of sibling conflict might be because they haven't been able to work out some stuff in their relationship because they're not getting opportunity because they're on devices or their dopamine is too high or their cortisol is too high. And if you're seeing an off balance, then maybe just consider what it would look like to have a detox. And you don't even have to commit to one. Just think about, well, would this actually create more room? What if you find, well, my kids only use screen like like an hour a week. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something else going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have to make all this like, I just feel like parents are very, very overwhelmed. They're like, oh, another thing. It's like, it only can be one thing. It can be just if your gut, your intuition is saying something's off here.
Yeah. And that's a great point too, because there's so many shoulds in parenting, like everywhere you look, and there's so much shame that can wrap you up and swallow you whole where you're like, oh gosh, here's another thing I'm not doing right. But I think it's also empowering where just assess your home. And I mentioned earlier, like 75% of parents, this is the biggest issue for them. But that also means that for 25% of parents, they're fine with the status quo in their
Yeah, it's
home.
working.
So
Maybe they've
it's
already done the
fine.
work. They could have
Yeah.
already set some boundaries or they've had a slow tech environment for a long time. We went
Yeah.
to a school that was slow tech, slow, on purpose. So I was in a like-minded community. That was kind of our values. I didn't have it. I remember one friend telling me that Baby Einstein was bad. That's like
Oh,
dating me and
yeah.
my children.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that.
Um, and I was watching this other mom who I respected show Baby Einstein. And then this other mom was like, oh, you shouldn't have your kids watch any tech. And I was like, what the heck? This was like, I had like a 18-month-old and I was like, whoa, I had no idea there was like so much to learn. And I kind of went like, well, what is important to me? And I asked my friend who was really thoughtful about it and she got really good points, kind of what we're talking about. And this was what, 2005? So a long time ago,
Hmm.
before there was even a iPhone existed.
Oh, yeah.
But I was already kind of like, oh, this is going to be a value for us. This is going to be, we want to encourage childhood and be an outdoor family and be a play-based family and that kind of value system. And that's when I got exposed to it. What if I had got exposed 10 years later,
Yeah.
undoing that work would have meant doing more detoxes and more getting my family back aligned. But it's all possible and it's all worth it.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think the early 2000s, early 2010s was probably the hardest time for parents because it was all, the iPhone came out in 2007, the iPad came out in 2011, and the marketing was pretty fierce. It was like, hey, if you want to raise a little rocket scientist, early technology is best. And I bought into that marketing for sure. I remember buying a tablet holder to go in the back of my like the driver's seat in the car so my kids could watch probably Baby Einstein or something like that.
Hmm.
But I bought into the marketing absolutely. And then after a couple years getting these nudges like, gosh, is this right? Because they can transition just fine from like a puzzle to bubbles, but they can't really go from a screen to anything. Like what is going on? So parents would get these nudges and then the data starts coming out. And we're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay." And then here's the kicker for me too is you find out the people who are the most involved in the creation of this technology are the strictest parents about their own kids' use of technology.
Yeah.
So
Well, we
that's the
talked about
kicker.
that with Mama in the last episode, and it was really that these devices were originally built for adults and for work. And then the entertainment came and the creativity, the content came. And at some point it became normal for us to put them in the hands of children. And that could have been marketing or just normalizing overwhelm. We all grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons and after school specials. So we kind of thought, well, that's what it's okay for kids to have some content. We had Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, and there was content for children. And so there was somewhat of a normalized thing that there's some things that are appropriate for children that are on screens. And at some point, literally the wheels fell off the train. Like we just became completely derailed as a society. And maybe going back to some of those earlier values of child based content that is on a large TV that's limited to certain amounts of time, and then that we're good. Like, yeah, you want to sleep in on a Saturday morning, you want to have morning cartoons in your family. Yes, let's do that on a TV where kids have to negotiate what they're watching. You're in charge of the remote. You put it on. You come in, you're like turning it off because everyone's leaving for whatever activity. Being parent led in
Yep.
this way. Yeah, it's a very possible. I want to just give lots of hope.
Absolutely. And that's another reason why it's so hard to parent well with technology now. Because when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was like my parents couldn't, and they were pretty hands off. They were like the opposite of helicopter. They're great parents. They were not like getting super, I'm the fourth born too. So they're like, you're good. Everything's going to be great. But, they knew that if I'm sitting in front of the TV, there's a rating system in place and there are sensors and there are things that kids won't hear if they're watching television. And now, if a kid has a device that connects to the internet, there is no rating system, there are no filters. So, if our kids have a device, an iPhone, a smartphone, a tablet, a computer, anything that connects to Wi-Fi, it is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they're going to be seeing porn. They're going to be
Hmm.
coming across these things that will alter their brains forever.
Hmm.
These images that are so explicit and harmful. So we just have to work a little harder. But to your point, there are absolutely ways to use technology in redemptive and purposeful uses. So for me, it's all about putting technology in its right place. And I kind of laugh about this because, and I like to clarify, I'm definitely not anti-technology. It's just putting it in its right place. My dad put food on the table as a writer. He wrote in television, wrote TV shows. Like I love a good TV show. We love digital entertainment in our house. It's just a matter of sifting and sorting and being wise and purposeful and intentional about how it works best in my home and not without shame, truly.
Yeah.
Like don't stress if your next door neighbor does it different. You tell my kids all the time, like, yeah, that's their house rules. That's cool. This is our
Hmm.
house rules. This is what we do. They can do whatever they want. Those are their kids. That's cool. Like, this is how we do it in our house. And this is what we've chosen to watch or not watch or allow or not allow. And there are so many great resources too. I mentioned my oldest two are in high school. And there are ways for them to have phones without giving them access to everything under the sun. You can be in charge of the apps that are on their phone.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, too, schools do not make it easy. For a while, we were holding out in junior high and even in high school, and it's like you don't have internet access, you don't have app store access, but the teachers are asking these kids, like, okay, pull up your internet browser, and we're all playing this game together. And your kids like the odd one out, which makes it tough. But again, a little bit of intentionality, a little bit of research, and you can make these guardrails and these parameters. You can make the technology work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why like organizations like Mama are so helpful because they are creating bell to bell rules so that that the teacher, that also normalizes equity. But if the teacher wants to have some sort of, access to a Kahoot or whatever they're
Yeah.
playing, that it's with the tech at school, and then that tech can stay at school. There's not really a lot of reason why it needs to be a one-to-one. That was such a, 2010, 2012 value.
Yeah.
And thank God they did it, because then the Zoom world happened with the pandemic, and then kids did have some devices. But
Mhm.
we're not there anymore, and we've
Yeah.
learned that it's really unnecessary. And so we can start to advocate for our kids, starting in our own homes with, digital detoxing, and then finding out what actually works for our family. Maybe you don't even need to do a detox for some families. Maybe your kids are young enough where you just like new rules.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like it's summer and families are, feeling worried about their over screen use, especially if their kids aren't doing a lot of camps and stuff like that. Some kids that doesn't work for. It's like, just pick. Is
Yeah.
it an hour a day? Is it individual devices, one to one, or is it going to be the group device? Are we connected to the internet? Are we not? Just kind of make some broad strokes for yourself
Yeah.
and then tell your kids, hey, this is how it is. You get to be the parent.
Absolutely. And just to encourage parents too, like if I came across a piece of research that was so interesting to me, Dr. Jean Twangy,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, she's awesome. She wrote iGen, but she has like I think a couple other books, but she studied what makes kids happy. And they showed that every screen-based activity made kids less happy. And every non-screen activity made kids more happy. And that included chores and homework. And that really blew me away. There was not a single exception. So even though our kids are asking sometimes, like, please, I really want to play this game or I really want to do this app or whatever, we're thinking like, oh, that does make them happy. But we're the ones with the fully developed prefrontal cortex, right? They're the ones that they can't parse out like, oh no, that's my dopamine system beckoning me to the device. That's not actually the thing that's going to give me joy and happiness. So that's kind of our job, is to say, well, I know what the research shows, and I actually know that isn't what's best for you. And in saying like, no, we're not going to do that. Just like you said, like putting those rules in place and just kind of correcting course. And I just think there's no shame in course correcting. I actually think those are the coolest parents I know. Coolest coaches or teachers are the ones that are like assessing and going, hey, that didn't really work that well. What else can we try? They're
Yeah.
willing to say that, like full of humility, going, well, that didn't go how I planned. What's next? Give me another
Yeah.
idea, and trying. And that there's no shame in that. I think that's awesome.
It's so great. Yeah. So we're here to encourage everyone. I really do. I think everyone needs to read your book. It's such a good overview of why we need these rules and why we need to think about these things and then how to do it. It's very practical. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, darling. I
Any
love being
last
here.
last things you want to share? Or
I guess one last thing, just to encourage parents, you can do this. If you're feeling the nudge, just give it a shot. Just give it a try. I will tell you, I've helped thousands of parents do this. And of all the parents that have come and reported back to me, none of them have said it didn't work. None of them had said my results were just okay. Every response I've ever gotten has been, this blew us away. This changed our family. I couldn't believe how great this was for our home. So I would just encourage you, give it a shot. There's nothing to lose. You can do it.
thank you. Yes, I'm going to leave it with that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Mama, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, I want to encourage you to do two things. The first is go to my website, calmmamacoaching.com, and get a copy of the Stop Yelling cheat sheet. You'll get a step-by-step breakdown of the most important tool I teach, which is the pause break. And you'll also get 40 ideas to reset your body and balance your nervous system so you don't have to yell at your kids. You can get a copy of that, again, at my website, calmmamacoaching.com/stop yelling. The other thing I'd love for you to do is go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this podcast so that other moms can discover empowering and helpful, practical parenting strategies, just like you did today. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. It means a lot to be in your ear every week and to support you on your parenting journey.